Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Today, as always, I'm very happy to welcome as our speaker a good friend of the Vedanta Society and the Vedanta family as a whole, Dr. Jeffery Long, the Carl W. Ziegler Professor of Religious Studies at Elizabethtown College, Pennsylvania. Dr. Long's graduate degree is from the University of Chicago Divinity School. He also studied for 2 years at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, India. In 2018, Dr. Long received the Hindu American Foundation's Dharma Seva Award for his efforts to help Americans understand Hinduism in academia and public schools. He is a long-time practitioner of Vedanta and the author of many books on Hinduism, Jainism, and more. His 2 most recently published books are Indian Philosophy, an Introduction, published this year, and Nonviolence in the World's Religions, published in 2021. And just this week, Dr. Long's book, Hinduism in America, A Convergence of Worlds, published in 2020, received a book award from the Dharma Academy of North America. Congratulations. The subject of his talk today is the cosmos as Ishtadevata, beauty, wonder, and the spiritual path. And there will also be time for some Q&A at the end of Dr. Long's talk. So welcome, and please come.
Thank you, Diane, for that lovely introduction. And namaste, namaskar. Hello, good morning to everyone here. And I'm always grateful to be speaking at the Vedanta Society of New York. I really feel at home when I'm here with all of you. I see a lot of friendly, familiar faces. There's my friend Kusamita there, who will be mentioned in today's comments. And for those who've come for the first time in hopes of hearing Swami Sarvapriyananda, I apologize that I am not him, but he'll be back, right? He'll be back, yeah. Yes, exactly. And it's a huge honor to be asked to fill in for one of these sessions while he's away. So I am, as I said, deeply honored to be here. My remarks today build upon a talk which I gave over 2 years ago at the Vedanta Center of Greater Washington, D.C. in Silver Spring, Maryland. I gave that talk on Sunday, March 8th, 2020. Now, if you remember what you were doing early March of 2020, very soon after that, you weren't doing very much because you were at home, right? Less than a week after I gave that talk, the world went into lockdown to slow the spread of COVID-19. Already on March 8th, there was widespread anxiety and uncertainty about what was going to happen next. A few people were already starting to wear masks, and attendance that day was much lower than usual, as people were already beginning to avoid leaving home except for essential activities. So there was a scary atmosphere, right, at that time. And my talk today is not on COVID-19, but I would like to just briefly pause and acknowledge what a profound experience this has been in many ways. There was a wonderful blog posted by Swami Tathagatananda from the Boston Vedanta Society about how during COVID we were reminded as practitioners of Vedanta of what is always the case, right? That death is always nearby. Right, that there's always uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. And that the seclusion that was brought about by the lockdown was, in fact, an opportunity to meditate, to do spiritual reading, to really center ourselves on what was most important. I had an interesting experience around that time. There was an organization which contacted me that was wanting to advocate for religious organizations that wanted to have gatherings during COVID-19. And since I'm a religion professor, they asked, could you speak from the perspective of your tradition? And I said, well, I'm willing to, but my tradition is saying that it's good to stay home and meditate. So I don't know how helpful I will be to you. And they said, thank you very much. And I never heard back from them again. we love gathering and being together, but what is really important in this tradition is the kind of realization that can only come when we put everything else aside and let the mind become quiet and have that experience. And that also requires some solitude. So we had enforced solitude for the last couple of years. My talk that day was also not about COVID-19. Given that Albert Einstein's birthday is on the 14th of March, along with my own, I thought it would be appropriate, since it was March 8th, to give a talk on Einstein's spirituality. And I want to apologize that I'm not very formally attired today, but I'm wearing this Einstein t-shirt deliberately to see everyone in the t-shirt. So there is this quote on here: "The most wonderful experience we can have is the mysterious." And I'm going to be drawing from that quotation today in my remarks. So I'm wearing this shirt by design. I didn't get up and forget that I was speaking at the Vedanta Society. So Swami Atmagyanananda, many of you know him as Stuart Maharaj, who runs the Greater DC Vedanta Center, was quite excited by this topic and recommended a wonderful book to me, which was written by Swami Tathagatananda, with whom I know many of you are very familiar, as he ran this center for many, many years. The title of Swami Tathagatananda's book was Albert Einstein, His Human Side, and it explores Einstein's spirituality. So I'd like to begin my remarks today with some words of Einstein, which are cited by Swami Tathagatananda. So it begins with the t-shirt quote, right? "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. One to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed. To know that what is impenetrable to us really exists, manifesting itself as the highest wisdom and most radiant beauty which our dull faculties can comprehend, only in their most primitive forms. This knowledge, this feeling, is at the center of true religiousness. In this sense, and in this sense only, I belong to the rank of the devoutly religious men. It is enough for me to contemplate the mystery of conscious life perpetuating itself through all eternity, to reflect upon the marvelous structure of the universe which we can dimly perceive, and to try humbly to comprehend even an infinitesimal part of the intelligence manifested in nature." So those are the words of Einstein. I'd like to draw attention to three aspects of his thought that are revealed in this quote and comment upon them from a Vedantic perspective. First, Einstein places a strong emphasis on the experience of the mysterious, which he calls the source of all true art and science. He also sees it as being at the center of true religiousness. He defines himself as religious in the sense that his entire life's work was motivated by the very same sense of awe and wonder, of the mysterious, that motivates the religious life. But he's also quite clear in affirming that he's not religious in a conventional sense, that it is in the sense of his work being rooted in awe and wonder, and that sense only, that he belongs, quote, to the rank of the devoutly religious. In my original talk, I did talk about the importance of Einstein's Jewish heritage in his approach to spirituality. He was deeply influenced by the philosopher Spinoza, and he once said that the God that Spinoza talks about, that is the God that I believe in. And if you're familiar with the philosophy of Spinoza, Spinoza essentially identifies God with the universe, right? That God has become this whole universe. If Einstein lived today, he might very well describe himself as spiritual but not religious. For spirituality of Einstein's variety, deeply felt, but not moored to the conventional forms of religiosity, has increasingly become differentiated from religion, that is, from religion's outward forms, by people today. This is especially true of people of my students' generation. Einstein, though, notes that spirituality is in fact at the heart of religion, or at least at the heart of true religion, the center of true religiousness. Secondly, a feature that one cannot help but notice, especially given Einstein's brilliance and the fact that when we hear the word genius, the first person we typically think of is Einstein, is his humility. He refers to the intelligence that is manifested in, quote, the marvelous structure of the universe as impenetrable to us, and says that we only dimly perceive this structure. The study of this structure leads us, in his words, to comprehend only an infinitesimal part of the divine intelligence. The emotion that this insight evokes in Einstein is not pride, but rather deep humility. I think this is a great contrast with something that we sometimes hear along the lines of, okay, we've pretty much figured the world out, right? We know everything now. I don't think Einstein would agree with that at all. Can that ever be the case? Finally, we might reflect from a Vedantic perspective on the idea of the divine reality as, in Einstein's words, impenetrable. Einstein is speaking here of the impenetrability of the divine reality by the mundane intellect, even an intellect as brilliant as his own. He says again that the impenetrable manifests itself, quote, as the highest wisdom and the most radiant beauty which our dull faculties can comprehend only in their most primitive forms. This is true from the point of view of Vedanta as well. A persistent theme of the teaching of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda is the ultimate futility of the intellect, of mere book learning, in the spiritual life, except, and this is a very important exception, to the extent that the intellect can serve to reveal its own limitations, becoming the jumping-off point to a knowledge beyond knowledge, to vijnana, or God realization. This is not an anti-intellectual claim, but a recognition that the intellect has a very specific role to play in the pursuit of realization. On the path of jnana yoga, we must certainly go through the intellect in order to go beyond the intellect. But one must also not remain limited to it if one is to reach the state of transcendence, the state of vijnana. In this state, God is no longer a topic of speculation. The vijnani, in the words of Sri Ramakrishna, sees God. He sees God even with his eyes open. That's a quote from Sri Ramakrishna, and it reminds us of another conversation in which the young Narendranath Datta, he who would become Swami Vivekananda, asks Sri Ramakrishna, have you seen God? And Sri Ramakrishna not only says yes, but he says, only more intensely than I am seeing you now. Right? So that there is a realization that goes beyond the senses, beyond the intellect, which it is the goal of Vedanta to cultivate. Two of the chief attractions of Vedanta for me personally, particularly as it's been presented by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, are its religious pluralism and its affirmation of the unity of religion and science. On the side of religion, there is, of course, Sri Ramakrishna's teaching that the many religions are many paths to the realization of different facets or aspects of the same ultimate reality. Whether we experience this reality as the supreme Brahman beyond the categories of personal and impersonal, or as the supremely loving personal God of Bhakti Yoga, it is the self-same infinite reality to which there are infinite paths. And whether we conceive of the eternal principle as Brahman, or the Tao, or the Buddha nature, or the personal God as the one God of the Abrahamic religions, or as any of the myriad personal deities of the Hindu tradition, or the countless traditions of the past and present in which the Supreme Being is conceived as manifesting in many forms, we are connecting to the same infinite reality. As Sri Ramakrishna has famously stated, quote, I have practiced all religions, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and I've also followed the paths of the different Hindu sects. I have found that it is the same God toward whom all are directing their steps, though along different paths. He who is called Krishna is also called Shiva, and bears the name of the primal energy or Shakti, Jesus and Allah as well, the same Ram with 1,000 names. Swami Vivekananda has unpacked and systematized this insight even further, conceptualizing the many religions as combinations of the 4 yogas, each of which, according to his teaching, is its own independent path to realization. As Swami Vivekananda has said, quote, the ultimate goal of all mankind, the aim and end of all religions, is but one, reunion with God, or what amounts to the same, with the divinity which is every person's true nature. But while the aim is one, the method of attaining may vary with the different temperaments of human beings. Both the goal and the methods employed for reaching it are called yoga, a word derived from the same Sanskrit root as the English yoke, meaning to join us to our reality, God. There are various such yogas or methods of union, but the chief ones are karma yoga, service, bhakti yoga, devotion, raja yoga, meditation, and jnana yoga, knowledge. On the side of science, Swami Vivekananda expands Vedantic pluralism beyond religion and includes science within the scope of its expansive worldview. He has said, quote, "Modern science has really made the foundations of religion strong. That the whole universe is one is scientifically demonstrable. What the metaphysicians call being and the physicist calls matter. But there is no real fight between the two, for both are one." It is remarkable that Swamiji spoke these words in 1895. They're from a volume entitled Inspired Talks, which records Swamiji's teachings to a gathering of his disciples at Thousand Island Park in the summer of that year. If he had spoken these words today, he would have been on an even firmer foundation as far as physics is concerned, for matter has been redefined in such a way, by subsequent discoveries and theories, as to be quite far from the mere dead matter of classical physics. Matter has instead been shown to be a dynamic reality, ultimately indistinguishable from energy. And of course, Albert Einstein was to play a central role in this discovery, right? What is the relationship of energy and matter? Anyone want to say it? E equals mc squared, right? So there you have it. Indeed, in light of Einstein's discoveries in particular, the next few words spoken by Swamiji in his inspired talks are especially striking. Quote, "Though an atom is invisible, unthinkable, yet in it are the whole power and potency of the universe. That is exactly what the Vedanta says of Atman." All sects are really saying the same thing in different words, and he's including science in all sects here. The main point that Swamiji is making is that just as religions can be seen as different ways of conceiving the inconceivable, as different languages for speaking the unspeakable, science too is a way of knowing reality which, because reality is one, is ultimately compatible with spiritual teaching as well. I wish to return to this point, but I'd also like for us to appreciate briefly Swamiji's insight in referring to the atom as containing the whole power and potency of the universe, in light of Einstein's subsequent discovery of the power of the atom, as well as the horror which this power is capable of unleashing when it is not guided by ethical wisdom. And when I read these words of Swamiji, that the atom, contained within the atom are the whole power and potency of the universe, I picture a mushroom cloud in my mind. I cannot help but, just because of everything that's happened in the last century. If we can return to the topic of Einstein's spirituality, I'd like to come to the main point of my presentation today, at which my previous talk on Einstein concluded. I would like to suggest that for a person who is not drawn to conventional religiosity and who is skeptical of at least a literal understanding of religion's claims, but who possesses the sense of awe and wonder that motivated Einstein and that he saw as central to true religiosity, the universe itself may serve as something akin to the Ishtadevata, the chosen deity of Bhakti Yoga. And I should say a little bit about what Ishtadevata is for anyone who's not so familiar with Vedanta. But we have the four yogas, right? Really, there are as many yogas as there are beings on the path, but they tend to cluster into four groups, and one of these is Bhakti Yoga. This is yoga centered on loving devotion to a personal form of the infinite divine. And Ishtadevata is that your chosen deity. It is the form of divinity which speaks to you most clearly, right, with which you feel a special connection. We could say Ishtadevata is the deity that we choose to focus our meditation and our practice upon, but one could also argue that the Ishtadevata is the deity who chooses us, right, for whom we are chosen, right, that this is the form of divinity that springs immediately to mind when we think of the divine reality. So what I'm suggesting is that, especially for a non-religious person, the Ishtadevata may be the universe itself, that the universe itself may evoke that same sense of devotion and connection which any of the personal forms of divinity do for those who follow that practice. Like conventional Ishtadevatas, personal figures such as Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Christ, Shiva, the Divine Mother, The cosmos itself serves, for people like Einstein, to evoke the very same sense of devotion and wonder as the personal deity for theistic devotees. In both cases, the Ishtadevata, the personal deity of the religious devotee, and the cosmos itself for the skeptical yet awe-inspired scientist, points beyond itself to the infinite reality which cannot be grasped fully by the intellect, but toward which the intellect's curiosity forever drives it. To again cite Einstein, quote, "It is enough for me to contemplate the mystery of conscious life perpetuating itself through all eternity, to reflect upon the marvelous structure of the universe, which we can dimly perceive, and to try to humbly comprehend even an infinitesimal part of the intelligence manifested in nature." My claim here that the universe itself can serve as an Ishtadevata to one who is skeptical of conventional religious views is based on the fact that according to Vedanta, the universe is itself a manifestation of Brahman, the infinite. This is the insight of the Vijnani. To again cite Sri Ramakrishna, quote, "What is Vijnana? It is knowing God in a special way. The awareness and conviction that fire exists in wood is jnana, or intellectual knowledge. But to cook rice on that fire, eat the rice, and get nourishment from it is vijnana. To know by one's inner experience, as Einstein did, that God exists is jnana. But to talk to him, to enjoy him as a child, as friend, as master, as beloved, is vijnana. The realization that God alone has become the universe and all living beings is vijnana. If God alone has become the universe and all living beings, then why cannot the universe itself, no less than any living being, such as Rama or Krishna or Ramakrishna, serve as one's Ishtadevata, as the object of one's single-minded devotion and concentration? This indeed is how Swami Tathagatananda describes Einstein. Quote, "He cultivated the monkish attitude of detachment and was deeply absorbed in the thought of the mystery in nature. His whole constellation of religious attitude, insight, and emotion are wrapped up in one brief invocation, mystery. It outstrips all descriptions, eludes all definitions, rendering all accounts pitiably inadequate. This seeking of the eternal in creation was as arduous and compelling as it was adventurous and fulfilling." Now, it is not my expectation that non-religious people will find what I am saying here to be particularly compelling. The moment we start speaking from a Vedantic perspective of God having become this whole cosmos, or of God realization, or of God anything, it's probably going to be a major turnoff, right, for these folks. What I'm seeking to do here, though, is not to covertly convert those who are non-religious to Vedanta, or to argue that they're really Vedantins, they just don't know it yet. As Swami Vivekananda once said, when he was asked if his intent was for people to be converted to something, he said, "God forbid." Right? My intent in this presentation is to think through what it means for Vedanta to be a truly universal philosophy. Many thinkers in the West have found the religious pluralism of Vedanta to be deeply appealing, as have I. Many of us have grown up in or adjacent to traditions which teach that the adherents of other paths or of no path are condemned for all eternity, that all those who do not worship whoever or whatever I regard to be the one true God will be damned to hellfire. I've spoken here previously of how horrifyingly arbitrary I found this idea to be. For why should people be condemned by a just God, much less a loving God, for following their religions and the religions of their families? As one religious pluralist and one of my favorite Western thinkers, the late John Hick, has written eloquently about this issue, quote, "A hermeneutic of suspicion is provoked by the evident fact that in perhaps 99% of cases, the religion to which one adheres or against which one reacts is selected by the accident of birth. Someone born to devout Muslim parents in Iran or Indonesia is very likely to be a Muslim. Someone born to devout Buddhist parents in Thailand or Sri Lanka is very likely to be a Buddhist. Someone born to devout Christian parents in Italy or Mexico is very likely to be a Catholic Christian, and so on. Thus, there is a certain non-rational arbitrariness in the claim that the particular tradition within which one happens to have been born is the one and only true religion. How convenient, right? And if the conviction is added that salvation and eternal life depend upon accepting the truths of one's own religion, it may well seem unfair that this saving truth is known only to one group, into which only a minority of the human family have had the good fortune to be born. I would add that not only does this seem deeply unfair, but if one further affirms the idea that an all-knowing God has deliberately created and placed many of us in regions of the world and in periods of history in which it would be highly unlikely, if not impossible, for us to even be aware or much less practice the true religion, and that the result of this situation is our suffering eternally in hell, then such a God sounds not only unfair and unloving, but positively malevolent. Indeed, it's precisely ideas such as these which drive many people away from religion, and quite rightly so, if this is the only or the predominant form of religion to which they've been exposed. Of course, from the perspective of the Vedantic teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, we can say that such exclusivism is not necessarily entailed by being religious, and that such attitudes and views are indeed contrary to the true spirit of the many paths to realization. There's a great quote by Swami Prabhavananda where he says, if you gathered the founders of the world's religions together in a room, they would probably embrace. And then if you gathered their followers together in the same room, they'd probably start fighting and killing each other. While I agree with this statement, however, I'd like to go a little further in my remarks today. Right? We've been talking about religious pluralism. That, of course, is a big part of what our tradition teaches. What I would like to argue is that even the expansive vision of religious pluralists like John Hick and others who've been inspired by Vedanta is ultimately insufficient to capture the universal vision of Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji. It is not only the world's religions that are paths to realization. I would like to argue that we should think not merely in terms of religious pluralism, but worldview pluralism. The philosophies, both religious and non-religious, are finally views of the same reality. This must be the case if reality is one, and if we all inhabit the same cosmos. Our views differ because we differ. Our vantage points differ. But we're not in different universes, even if it may sometimes seem that way when communication is difficult and feelings run deeply. I believe there's deep wisdom in the fact that the Sanskrit word that is traditionally used to translate the word philosophy in English is darshana. A darshana or darshan in modern Indic languages is a point of view. It's a worldview. And if the world we are viewing is one, then there must be deep connections across our worldviews, even if these are not immediately evident to us. If we look back to the philosophical darshana literature of ancient, classical, and medieval India, we do not find that it makes a sharp distinction between what in the West we call religious and non-religious, or religious and secular, which maps precisely onto these Western categories. There is the distinction between astika and nastika philosophies, which typically refers to the distinction between those schools of thought that affirm the authority of the Veda, like the famous 6 systems of Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, and Vedanta, and those which do not, like Buddhism, Jainism, and the materialist Lokayata or Charvaka school of thought. This distinction does not always mean the same thing, however, to every author. The Jain philosopher Haribhadra Suri, for example, defines astika philosophies as those which affirm karma, rebirth, and liberation, and so include Jainism and Buddhism. And he confines the term nastika to the Lokayata school. In modern usage, astika and nastika have come to mean theistic and atheistic, which is somewhat close to popular ideas of religious and non-religious, but not all traditions that are regarded by most people as religions are necessarily theistic, at least not in the sense of affirming a creator deity. Buddhism, Jainism, and Confucianism are good examples of this. There is also a distinction which is made between laukika, or worldly perspectives, which focus chiefly upon the practical realm, which is available to our senses, and so come close to something like the idea of the secular in modern thought, and alaukika, or non-worldly perspectives, which focus on concepts like karma, rebirth, and the path to liberation. But these are not divisions of communities or groups of people or philosophies. We're all doing something laukika when we're operating in the material world, and we're doing something alaukika when we're on our spiritual path. So the same person is doing both. My point is that no perspective is generally viewed in traditional Indian philosophy as utterly beyond the pale of consideration or excluded wholly as a point of view on reality which captures some element of truth. In traditional Indian doxographical texts, which list various systems of thought known to the author and describe their teachings, the materialist Lokayata or Charvaka system is generally ranked last as the view that's the furthest from the truth perceived by the author. But it's nevertheless included, right? It's present in the list of views of reality which one must master and learn and consider. And it's seen as having its own proper purview, namely reality inasmuch as it's available to sensory perception, or pratyaksha. This calls to mind Swami Vivekananda's teaching that, quote, "You must remember that humanity travels not from error to truth, but from truth to truth. It may be, if you like it better, from lower truth to higher truth, but never from error to truth." Right? He's saying no one is completely wrong, because we're all viewing some portion of the same reality that we all inhabit. Thus, from a Vedantic perspective, even a materialistic point of view that only reveals the surface level of existence is nevertheless to that extent true. It is thus a point of access to reality itself, which is what Einstein found the study of the material universe to be. Another reason I'd like to argue for the idea of the cosmos as Ishtadevata is because of the profoundly ecological sensibility that a perception of nature as divine can evoke. Right? If nature is divine, our attitude toward it should be of reverence, of respect, of gratitude, not exploitation, not destruction, of the kind that has really brought us perilously close to global apocalypse. A wonderful example of a thinker who approached the cosmos in this way was the late Father Thomas Berry. I was made aware of Father Berry's work by our mutual friend, Kusamida Peterson, who is sitting right there, who wrote to me that, although he was a Catholic priest, quote, "it is possible that for him the universe was his Ishtadevata." She also wrote to me that Father Berry, quote, "spoke of himself as a geologian rather than a theologian, and would speak of the divine rather than God." Kusamita further elaborates in a review that she wrote of a book on Berry's life that, quote, "he held that a total human experience of reality belongs to no one society, but to the world community itself, and that a world philosophy must be grounded on knowledge of all traditions, including not only the West and Asia, but also indigenous cultures and natural science." Interestingly, Kusamita's review appears in a journal called Worldviews. Right? Very appropriate. To see the cosmos as Ishtadevata is, in short, to see the cosmos as divine, to see the reality that is revealed to our senses and as a manifestation of the highest reality, and as a means by which that reality can be perceived. The beauty and wonder that is evoked in us by the universe is the self-same beauty and wonder that draws the devotee to a particular form of divinity in the traditional religious sense. Again, my point in saying this is not to claim that non-religious people are anonymous Vedantins, unconsciously approaching a divine reality in which they may not believe through the medium of the cosmos which they do perceive and which fills them with awe and wonder. This would be to claim a privileged perspective into the consciousness of another person, which I don't think it's our right to affirm. All of us, however, perceive reality through the categories available to us from the philosophies that we know, and from our own experiences of reality, and from whatever perspective we find ourselves to be committed. I think it is important for those of us who hold a Vedantic point of view, who are rooted in the teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and the Holy Mother, to go beyond the category of religion in our thinking about the paths to ultimate truth. And just a side comment, many of us, and this is an irony, I was recently at the American Academy of Religion annual meeting. I am a scholar of religion. I was there with many, many other scholars of religion, and most of us agree that the term religion has probably outlived its usefulness. It seems to create more barriers to understanding than it does enable understanding. And I've used the distinction, I've used the term today precisely to break down the distinction, right? That there are worldviews. Everyone has a worldview. If you say everyone has a religion, people are going to be ready to fight with you. But you can't really deny that we all have a worldview. Well, Nagarjuna doesn't have a worldview, but other than Nagarjuna, so inside Indian philosophy joke. But the rest of us have a worldview. So One of Sri Ramakrishna's great insights, I believe, is that there are infinite paths to infinite reality. He makes us ask ourselves, why should a grasp of ultimate truth be possible only from the point of view of a particular religion? Swamiji presents us with the same question, such as in his great metaphor of the frog in the well, who thinks that the water in his little well is the greatest body of water in the world, and scoffs at the idea that there's an ocean out there that might be even greater than his little well. Once we've expanded our view to accommodate many religions, however, we might still be left with a barrier between the religious and the non-religious. According to John Hick's model of religious pluralism, which draws deeply from Vedanta, the personal and impersonal forms of ultimate reality to which the world's religions orient their adherents are all ways of accessing that ultimate reality. But as students in my Philosophy of Religion course to whom I introduce Hick's ideas often ask, what about people who are not religious, right? And many of them are thinking of themselves. Are they not able to access ultimate reality, right? Do you need to have one of these sort of pre-authorized access points that's called a religious conception of reality? Especially given Swami Vivekananda's affirmation of the unity of Vedanta and science, and the profound spirituality evident in the thought of Einstein or of Carl Sagan, despite the strong skepticism of both about traditional religiosity. It seems to me that there's no basis for affirming that those who do not follow a religious path are in any worse position to access ultimate reality than those of us who do. Indeed, religiosity can often be a stumbling block in spiritual life if we misread it as teaching that we are in some privileged position that makes us superior to the rest of humanity and allow that to inflate our ego. So we might think, I'm a member of this tradition. I'm better than those other people. And then even if we accept pluralism, we say, well, at least I'm religious. I'm not like those non-religious people, right? Especially when this is used to facilitate violence between adherents of different traditions, it can become the bane of our existence. Non-religious critics of religion, in fact, serve an important function in warning those of us who adhere to a tradition of the dangers that adherence can bring if we're not careful with it, right? Religion is like the atom. It contains a lot of power, and so we need to handle with care. And we must always remember that Swami Vivekananda said, quote, "It is better to be an outspoken atheist than a hypocrite." He was very blunt. Right? He didn't hold back on these things. In short, from a Vedantic perspective, rooted in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda and the Holy Mother, any external adherence or non-adherence that a person has to a specific philosophy or a religion, any label that a person might choose to wear or not wear, is ultimately irrelevant to that person's attainment of God realization. I would venture to say that there are persons who do not believe in God who are closer to God realization than some who do believe in God. My intent here is not to offend any of those persons. I can perhaps hope that they will find my claims here amusing rather than offensive. Most non-religious people say, I really don't care what you think about me. Fine. But we want to understand these things from our Vedantic point of view. My intent is to affirm within the family of those of us who follow Vedanta that there's no reason to exclude any worldview or any person out of hand as being beyond the pale of the path to realization, and that this path is truly universal and all-encompassing. Truth can be found anywhere, and if we're truly seeking to walk the path of Sri Ramakrishna, we will look for it everywhere, in religious teachings, in science, in art, in music, and in the beauty, the wonder, and the curiosity evoked by the universe itself. For in the words of the Chandogya Upanishad, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, all this entire cosmos, is indeed Brahman and can lead us to Brahman. So that's the end of my formal remarks. Thank you all for listening. And we have some time, I think, for questions, which often ends up being the best part. So please stay for the questions and ask questions if you have. Yes.
Good morning, Dr. Long. That was a very nice lecture. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I had one question. My name is Vinod.
Yes.
My question is, one of the fundamental aspects of regular Ishtadevata is the aspect of faith.
Yes.
Now, how do you incorporate this aspect of faith in this view of cosmos as Ishtadevata?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And so just to repeat the question, so faith is an essential element. Shraddha, as it's called in Sanskrit, faith is an essential element of the practice of Bhakti Yoga within Ishtadevata. How does that map on to this idea of cosmos as Ishtadevata? I think there is an element of faith, but it's of a different kind than what we find in a more traditional concept of Ishtadevata. Because the traditional concept of Ishtadevata is of a person, right? And in a more traditional kind of Vedantic framework, if you're not drawn to divine personhood, then the path is Jnana Yoga or Raja Yoga or Karma Yoga, right? It's contemplating the nature of the impersonal Brahman, or practicing meditation, or engaging in service. So if we're going to say the cosmos can act as something like an Ishtadevata, the faith element there that one finds in science is what we could call, broadly speaking, the faith that the universe is orderly and that knowledge of it is possible. And this is the foundation on which all science, and in fact all knowledge, rests. Because if the cosmos did not follow some orderly pattern, then we could have no knowledge. You couldn't do an experiment, because if there was no order to the universe, you could do an experiment at time t, and then you could do exactly the same experiment at time t plus 1, and the result would be completely different. And then you do it at time t plus 2, and it would be different yet again. And every experiment would be anomalous. So no knowledge could be gained from that, right? When we see, okay, if I do these things, the same thing happens most of the time, statistically speaking. Okay, so I'm uncovering some truth of the universe. So the idea that through an ordered method of thinking, right, basically what we call the scientific method, reality slowly reveals itself to the mind. I think that is the kind of faith that is involved in the spirituality of someone like Einstein. So it is distinct from the kind of faith we have in an Ishtadevata traditionally, is that this is a personal being on whom we can rely, right? Who is a being of pure love, who knows what's best for us, and we can just surrender at the feet of that being, and we'll be liberated. I'm not envisioning a non-religious person thinking about the universe in quite that way, though that is possible. I mean, you can argue also from a material perspective, the universe sustains us, right? It's where we get our oxygen, it's where we get our food and our water and so on. So we do have a radical dependence on the universe on the physical level. And from a Vedantic perspective, we could see that as mirroring our dependence on the infinite on the spiritual plane. But I think the faith element is present, but it's different, right? It consists of that sense that, and this is true of any worldview, that there are some axioms, there's some basic principles that are not themselves provable, but that one has to assent to in order to build any kind of system of thought. And so for science, as I understand it, I'm not a scientist, but it is this sense that the universe is orderly and knowable. Maybe not knowable in an ultimate sense, there may be just more things than are possible for us to know, but that there's no inherent unknowability in the universe. It's a function of how we approach it. So that would be the parallel I would see. But it's not identical, right? It's not exactly the same. Now, if you take this idea a step further, if someone actually sees the universe as their deepest inspiration, and they have something like a Vedantic worldview, right? They can sort of say, okay, the infinite reality is manifesting to me in the form of the experiences I'm having from day to day in the material world and so on. That's a kind of faith that I think is closer to the traditional Ishtadevata. And I don't see any reason the universe can't serve that function as well, because in fact it does in many indigenous traditions, for example. The universe itself is the sacred reality. So that's the basis of finding signs and portents in nature, sort of being able to read the trends of events and so on. This comes from the sense that nature is actually speaking to us as a living reality. So that's close to what I'm talking about here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So a lot of hands popping up, so please.
Thank you. My name is Oscar. Picking up on what you just said about the universe, the world is not inherently unobservable, right? the question of faith and all that. And so Einstein says that this mysterious thing about the universe, right? Okay. In a way, it always remains mysterious because it can never truly be known. The more we know about the world, the more things we come to know, to not know.
Yes.
Such as, Einstein had a lot of trouble understanding quantum mechanics.
Yes.
A Jesuit priest helping, Georges Lamarck, I think was his name, helping understand that. Okay, he saw it. Yet he was not still struggling with that idea because, he comes from mathematics. Everything is rational. From mathematics, we see the world, a worldview.
Yes.
So quantum mechanics sees differently, from observation.
That's right.
Now, Spinoza, the world is God. It's a very pantheistic view.
Pantheistic.
However, Vedanta sees in a different way. It sees that way, but also goes beyond that.
Yes.
God is immanent and transcendent.
Yes.
God is in the world, Ishtadevata, and also Brahman.
Yes.
Transcendent.
Yes.
In that way, we know. Mm-hmm. In that way, I can agree. The world is inherently observable, achievable.
Right.
Only through the transcendent.
Right.
But doesn't the world remain always mysterious?
Mm-hmm. Does the world remain always mysterious?
Yes.
I think that's a very good question because and I want to pick up a little bit on what you were just saying about how the Vedantic view is a little different from Spinoza, right? Because what we often call pantheism suggests that God has become the world or is the world, and that sort of exhausts the reality of God, right? Which is not the Vedantic understanding. Vedantic understanding is God manifests as, appears as the world, but is always vastly more also than the world. Like you said, transcendent as well as immanent. Is the world itself always infinitely mysterious? I think this is part of I'm going to invoke another concept, which is lila, right? This is the divine play where I think that if it pleases God for it to be infinitely mysterious, it will be infinitely mysterious, and we will get to experience the joy of forever exploring that. One of the things that inspired me as I was writing this is just a couple of days ago, this amazing photograph was released by NASA from the James Webb Telescope. A fairly detailed, more detailed than any we've seen before, photo of a planet around another star. And I was amazed. I mean, all my life I've been dreaming about, planets around other stars, Star Trek and all of these things. And it's like, there's a picture of one. And then, as you were saying, we always want to know more, right? We're always curious about the next mystery. I want to see photos of all the other planets now, too. Where are the other photos? I just wanted more, right, when I saw that. And so I think this really gets to the heart of the deep mystery, which is at the heart of Vedanta, which is, why does Brahman manifest as all of these worlds? And of course, again, when we say universe or cosmos, we mean the multiverse, right? We mean all actuality, all possibility, all of this is there. And one way of thinking of that, one of the ideas we find in the Hindu tradition is this is just God's joyful self-expression. If you're talking about a being which is infinite, then because that wellspring of creativity is also infinite, it could potentially continue unrolling just infinite universes, infinite possibilities. And maybe that's what we're all here to experience. Of course, we also have the idea of liberation, right? Not getting so caught up in this play that we suffer from it, and realizing, okay, I'm not this, I am the transcendent, right? Realizing that. But that this is also all happening for a reason, right? The divine has embarked upon this adventure for a reason. So my personal point of view is that why couldn't it be infinite? Because it is emerging from that which is infinite. And of course, there's a very famous verse of the Upanishads, which says, if you draw the infinite out from the infinite remains, right? Because it's infinite. It's one of the beautiful things about it. So it could be forever. I'm always skeptical when people say, oh, we've now figured everything out. I think, how boring would that be, right? That would not be exciting. Yeah, no, I want to see photographs of all those other worlds. Yeah. And then I'll want to go to them, right? That'll be the next step, right? So,
thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Kusmita, right? I think so everyone can hear you and so that the mic can pick you up. And thank you for the part you played in developing my...
Thank you for such a wonderful talk and the honorable mention. Two things. I don't know if anyone other than Spinoza ever was a pantheist. I once went on a quest for this. I think the word pantheism is used to beat up by Christians to beat up the other guy, you know. And indigenous traditions generally recognize a transcendent, formless origin of being.
Yes.
But I want to bring another piece to this from Swami Vivekananda and his poem To a Friend, especially. And it's been very important to me for over 50 years. So towards the end of the poem, he says, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm sorry I can't quote it from memory, I should. From the highest Brahman to the lowest worm, he was fond of mentioning the worm.
Worms.
And even to the minutest atom, in all of them is God, the all-love, the prema moyi. And God, this prema dwells in the heart of them all. And offer your mind, heart, and body at their feet. So it's the worship of the universe as the community of all beings, all countless individual beings. And so the poem concludes with, if you worship all beings, you are worshiping God. Right. And something similar in his short poem to the living God, break all other idols. Mm-hmm. So I just want to bring that as a kind of supplement to what you said, and it always reminds me of the Bodhisattva vow to love and, assist all beings.
Yes. Thank you. And it sounds like the idea of cosmos as Ishtadevata, right?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, precisely.
Well, and Sri Ramakrishna said to serve Jiva as Shiva.
Jiva is Shiva, right? Which means all jivas, right? All living beings. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that. And in fact, I don't think I'm saying anything new here at all. I think it's an unpacking of something that's already in the teachings of Swamiji and Sri Ramakrishna. And just if I can add, I think we're going to be unpacking Swamiji's teachings for centuries to come. He was on Earth briefly, but he sort of left us this very dense package of wisdom. And then our job is to just sort of slowly unwrap and unpack that and understand it and grasp it as much as we can. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was just moving it so that.
Okay. So close to I don't know. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts they'd like to share?
I thought there was another.
One thing I want to add. There's always when you write something, then you always think of what you forgot to say. So, and those of you, especially for those of you who are familiar with Swami Sarvapriyananda's teachings on Advaita Vedanta, there's this interesting point where, Sri Ramakrishna, we hear him saying, God has become the whole world. God has become all things. And in Advaita Vedanta, the idea is that that's not literally true, right? That God appears as all things, appears to becomes as all things, because Brahman is beyond time and space, and the whole concept of becoming is bound to time, space, and causation, and so on. So it's appearance. And what I would want to suggest is that appearance, which is, I think, a really good translation of the term Maya, is essentially the mechanism by which this becoming happens, right? We could say it's an apparent becoming, because we're being very careful about our metaphysical distinction between the appearance and the reality. But I think what Sri Ramakrishna is doing is just kind of getting directly to the point, right? That okay, you can think of all of this as Brahman. It is the appearance, but it is the appearance of Brahman only, right? Because there is nothing else. So this kind of gives us philosophical permission, you could say, almost, toward this sort of divinization of the world and of our experience. We have another question. Great.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for your lecture. My name is Mira.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the questions that went before me. mine's going to not sound as eloquent because I'm not very well read. You touched briefly upon the fire and the wood.
Oh, yeah.
And then the rice.
Mm-hmm.
And then the previous people touched upon faith.
Right.
If you could kindly elaborate those concepts putting together with the entirety of your lecture.
Okay.
It's a difficult way to phrase the question, but I think you actually seem to know what I'm asking.
I think I do. So what Sri Ramakrishna was doing in that passage about the fire and the wood and the rice and so on, he was differentiating between what's called in Sanskrit and in Bengali jnana and vijnana. That is, you have knowledge, so we know the fire is a potential in the wood, for example. Knowing that conceptually is different from actually lighting a fire, warming yourself over a fire, cooking food with fire. You have experience with the fire. You have a kind of intimacy with the fire. So vijnana is not only knowledge of the divine, but it's a kind of intimate interaction with the divine. So this is what Sri Ramakrishna had, according to the tradition, according to the materials we have about his life. And this is very different from where most of us are. Because, for example, people will raise the question, well, does God exist? Well, how do you know that God exists? And you have arguments for why God exists and proofs, and some of them seem to work, some of them maybe don't seem to work so well. But it's all on the conceptual level. If you're cooking rice with your fire, if someone were to ask you, well, does fire exist? You just kind of laugh at them. It's like, well, I hope so. I'm using it to cook my rice, right? I mean, you have gone so beyond that conceptual level that it's not, like the question, does God exist, as our students would say, was not a thing for Ramakrishna, right? Because he was intimately acquainted with God. And so you have knowledge, and then you have that kind of deep acquaintance, which is the highest knowledge, which we're aiming for ultimately. Faith, as I understand it, is a step even before knowledge, where you say, okay, I really don't know anything, but I have to move forward in my life. I need to put my one foot in front of the other. Do I know that my foot is going to land on solid ground, or is it going to swallow me up, or what's going to... I don't know. Well, okay, I see other people walking on the ground. I'm going to make a leap of faith. I'm going to trust that if I put my foot forward, I won't fall, I won't stumble, I won't be swallowed up by the earth, right? So I put my foot forward. Okay, I've taken a step. Now let me take another step. Let me do it again. So I summon up my courage. I take another step. Pretty soon I'm walking, right? Pretty soon I'm heading toward my goal. So when we have faith, we're basically saying, okay, I'm going to place my bets, so to speak, on whatever it may be, whether it's a spiritual tradition or practice or, a therapy, whatever it is. Like, okay, let me work with this. And then over time, you have experiences based on that. And rather like cooking the rice, it ceases to be a matter of faith, it becomes a matter of knowledge. As one of my favorite stories about Carl Jung, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but late in his life, he was apparently asked, do you believe in God? And he said, no. And the interviewer thought, okay, atheist. And then before the interviewer could write anything down, he says, I know God is real. And that sort of shocked the interviewer, right? Because it's not the answer you expect about that kind of question. Now, whether Carl Jung was a Vijnani or not, I'm not going to comment. I have no idea. But I love the story because it's saying we have belief at the stage where, we're really unsure, but like I was saying before, you have to have some axioms. You have to have some foundation. You have to have a starting point. So you choose a starting point. Maybe it's given to you by a tradition, by a family, by a culture. You start with that, and then you start to have experiences based on that, and that belief becomes knowledge. And then what we hope is that knowledge eventually becomes the knowledge beyond knowledge, the transcendental knowledge. So and then we're all in different places on that path. And not to be too linear, I think some days it's pure faith, other days it's really a quite enlightened perspective. We're all, practicing our sadhana. We're all doing things in various ways to try to cultivate that realization. And to have that realization, I shouldn't say try to cultivate, because in the words of Yoda, do or do not. There is no try, right? If you say you're going to try, you've already given up, is what I've heard sometimes. I'm going to try means like you don't really think you're going to do it. But when you really have that faith, you move forward. And I also find that for myself, this has been the case, and I think it's true for many other people as well. you only really know some of these things when you have some life experience that creates a very intense pressure on you, where you're like, I need to know, I have to take this step. Whether it's experience of death and loss, or some injury or disease, or whatever it may be, where you are just forced to sort of make a decision that tells you a lot about who you really are. Right? Because it often happens in such a way that you don't have a lot of time to think about it either. And so you just respond. And then you might hear words coming out of your mouth that actually surprise you. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? Well, that was, that deeper reality of who you are was making itself known at that point. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but that's kind of the way I'm thinking of this. So in terms of my talk today, I'm basically saying that if we're part of a tradition, like I'm part of this tradition, we should not be so conceited as to think that those who don't have this, either by choice or just by circumstance, are in some way beyond the pale, or not accessing exactly the same thing that we're accessing in their own way. I think that expansiveness is what I find in the teaching of Ramakrishna and Swamiji and the Holy Mother. I think the Holy Mother doesn't get mentioned enough. I always mention Sri Ramakrishna and Swamiji because we have this thick book of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, and we have 9 thick books of Swamiji's teachings, and the Holy Mother just spoke to people, but many of them did write down what they heard, and it was all very much building upon and in keeping with the same kind of vision. And she accepted anyone who came to her. She didn't turn anyone away at all. So I think that's what this is moving us toward. Yeah. So thank you. Okay. All right. Another question. Okay. Wonderful. Questions or comments, or... if you want to argue with me, that's fine too. Yeah.
So, hello, my name is Ben. I kind of going off of the last question, I understand one thing that you said in your talk was being spiritual but not religious. And I understand that intuitively, but I'm having a harder time, I guess, putting that into words and really just understanding what that means.
Right.
I know, for example, like we're all in different parts of our spiritual journey. And I find that, especially with religion, it gives some practices that are helpful to make you spiritual, but sometimes it can just lead you down the wrong path, and it's eating itself. It's not actually helping you to become spiritual. It's just, I'm just going to meditate for the sake of meditation. I'm just going to church for the sake of going to church,
right,
instead of actually to become closer to God. And so I guess my question is, how do you kind of navigate between using religion or some practices, meditation, whatever, as crutches versus actually helping you get closer to God? And because I find that even within myself, I can get a lot of self-deception where it feels good, but it might not actually. I realize maybe a few months later that, this actually isn't helping me spiritually.
Right.
Or even I don't feel any growth spiritually over here. But then just by keeping up with the same practice for some time, I eventually come to some realization. Right. So I guess, could you help navigate with some of that?
Yeah, it really requires us to be very brutally honest with ourselves. And like you said, we are sometimes prone to self-deception, right? We would all like to think that we were... I have a very good friend who's a pravajika in our tradition, and she once said... this is no offense to people in California. It's where she lives, so she was just referring to people in California. She says, we have all these Advaitins in California who say, I am one with the universe, and then their air conditioning stops working, and suddenly that sense of unity goes away, right? So I think we have to be brutally honest with ourselves, and it's like, okay... for example, you might be thinking, it's going great, I'm making a lot of spiritual progress, but that might just be because everything else is going well in your life. And then the minute something negative happens, where is the spirituality then? And I think that's an important question to ask ourselves. Do we think of God when someone cuts us off in traffic? Do we think of God when someone gets some acknowledgement and we think we should have gotten it? Do we think of God when there is death and loss and the really serious sufferings that happen to us in life. And if the answer is no, then, well, we need to work harder, right? And in terms of like finding a path, which I think is also part of your question, religion, like you said, it can become self-deceptive. You can think of yourself as, I had a teacher many years ago who used to use the term spiritual materialism. It's like, well, I meditate this many hours per week, so I must be really, enlightened. And it's like, yeah, but are you really meditating, or are you sitting in front of the shrine thinking about the work you have to do that day, or how irritated you are with the person who made an unkind remark the day before, or something like that? If we're finding ourselves straying off, then we have to work harder. But I think another thing that's important here, one of the reasons I don't call myself spiritual but not religious, and I'm part of a tradition and a community, is I think the concept of satsang is really important. Literally, one good literal translation is good company, right? Be with people who are like what you want to be like and who sustain you in that. And now the reverse of that is, that doesn't mean being judgmental and saying, oh, these are worldly people, I don't want to hang out with them, I'm better than them. It's not that. It's the positive side of that. I feel like my most authentic self when I'm with these people. So be with those people, cultivate that. And I would say, and this is a very 21st century thing, that the same thing is true of social media as well. If you tend to inhabit areas of social media that are very negative and that draw you into ways of thinking that pull you down, shut that down. Go to some nice Vedanta site, right? That is talking about positive things and where people are kind and saying good things. So we're surrounding ourselves with a good environment as much as we can. And then there's another aspect of this too. I think this is very important in Buddhism. It's part of the Eightfold Path called right livelihood. And this is sometimes harder for us to choose in today's economy, but your workplace is where you spend a lot of your life. And if you can make that a satsang as well, work in a place or with people and doing an activity that draws you into spiritual life and spiritual thinking, rather than something that's completely away from it or even antagonistic. If you have the ability to make those choices and navigate that, I think that's very good. But one last thing, to contradict everything I've just said, because this is what happens also in spiritual teaching very often. Sometimes we just have to kind of roll with what comes to us in life and realize maybe there's some deeper lesson in this, right? Maybe I don't like this job or this group of people or this particular environment or this particular situation, but maybe I'm there because there's something it has to teach me. And I find very often that when we release our own fears and anxieties and negativities about, say, a person or an activity, that just evaporates. And then you find yourself having a lovely, fulfilling experience with those people or in that place. So I say give everyone a chance, but as much as you can, gravitate to people, to reading, to social media, to things that elevate you and support you in your spiritual life, rather than detract from it. I think that's a really important thing.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. As if I know, right? I'm just speaking from my experience, right? I'm everybody's fellow traveler on this path.
So, my name is Nirupama, and so thank you so much for the insightful talk today. I just had two questions. So one was to clarify. So I heard you mention a couple of times about adult intellect in primitive forms, and I'm curious to understand what you meant by that. And the second question is, so there's this concept of attached detachment in Bhagavad Gita, and for the benefit of those who may not really know, it basically means that you detach yourself enough from the outcome, so you're not so drawn towards that, but at the same time you have attachment enough to be able to enjoy the process in the hope that you would reach the intended outcome. So I'm curious to understand if there is a link between Ishtadevata that you said to this concept, and if there is that kind of a link, how do we practice that in our day-to-day life?
That's a wonderful question. I'll take the second question first. I think that one of the, I like the way you've linked the idea of detachment and attachment to the Ishtadevata, because I think what Bhakti Yoga does is it takes our tendency to become attached and channels it in a positive way, right? So it transforms, what's the word I'm looking at? It sublimates attachment. So you become attached to God or to a particular form of the divine, rather than to your own ego or your own. So everything you do is, okay, I'm doing this for you, right? I'm doing this for the divine. So and the attachment is being channeled in a good direction. So you become attached not to, I'm doing this for me and I want the outcome to be good, so it looks good for me. It's like, I want this action to be good, so it's a worthy offering to you. Right? And so then that purifies that takes the ego element out of that attachment. Then it ceases to be attachment, it becomes love. Right? This is a very, very old concept in the Hindu tradition. If you go to like some of the Vedic offerings, there's this refrain, idam namama. Idam namama, this is not mine, right? This is not mine, and by implication, this is yours, right? This belongs to the God, to the divinity to whom the offering is being given. And what the Gita does brilliantly, it says you can take your whole life and do that with it, right? That it's not just, ghee or aromatic wood that you're offering in a Vedic ceremony, but your work from day to day, your job, your profession, your work with your family, your work with the community, that all becomes an offering. So bhakti, and this is why bhakti, I think, is often recommended in our era of history in our time, because rather than tell us to not have that sense of attachment, which is very, very hard, it says, well, let's channel it in a positive direction. And so then it eventually becomes something else entirely. It transforms into something else entirely. Mm-hmm. So, and what was the first question you had?
So you said something around, the adult intellect and primitive forms is when you'll be able to realize the impenetrable, something on those lines. So I was curious to understand, what do you mean by primitive forms?
Oh, by primitive forms. That was quoting from Einstein there. And so he was basically saying about himself, right? He's this brilliant intellect. It says, what we are understanding about the universe is probably just a very primitive understanding, right? That there is vastly more. And as as I think it was Oscar mentioned, that even in his own lifetime, quantum theory comes along and says, yeah, Einstein, you didn't quite get everything, and he had to deal with that. And that we may yet continue to unfold in our understanding toward ever deeper, more profound views of the universe, compared to which our current view then will look primitive. Just as we look on, say, Newtonian physics or, heaven forbid, Aristotelian physics and say, that's not really quite correct, right? But it was a stepping stone, right? Without that, whatever we have now would not be. So he used the word primitive to refer to that. So yeah, it's from the extended quote from Einstein at the start of the, which... to know that what is impenetrable to us really exists, manifesting itself as the highest wisdom and the most radiant beauty, which our dull faculties can comprehend only in their most primitive forms, right? So he's saying that there is this magnificent beauty and wonder in the universe, and we're only getting a little bit of it, right? He had the humility to say, and we're only seeing a small portion of that. Right? And he didn't live to get to see a photograph of a planet orbiting another star, right? And there will be even more profound things to come in the future. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Oh, that's another question. Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk. My name is Ajay. Just towards the end, you said, I think it was a closing statement, but something along the lines of, we should not be looking down on the guys who are probably following the universe concept as to be the real. But by definition, Vedanta almost treating new universe as illusion. From their perspective, they'll say, well, hold on, we've been spending all our lives to understand this thing, which is very real to us. Isn't that... And for us, it'll always be, as Vedantans, always be an illusion. Mm-hmm. Isn't that by definition? We would always wait for them to kind of
right.
There is that separation of, right. Although he's saying acceptance, but it's not from their intellect point of view. It's not.
This is always a really challenging issue. I find I still, this is an issue I've been thinking about a lot myself. That we sort of have to hold two things in tension at the same time. our commitment to what we understand and take to be true. And we don't want to say, well, no, maybe it's not really true or something. No, we really have the conviction that it's true. And especially if you've had some experiences, you've moved along this path, you're committed to that. And this idea that we must coexist with those who have a different idea. And I think this operates on several levels. Certainly at the level of society, politics, I mean, it's important for us to physically coexist with others, right? And this is why Swami Vivekananda said that our goal is acceptance, not tolerance, right? Yes. And you have a lot of people arguing today that we need a lot more tolerance in the world. Tolerance is certainly better than intolerance. Intolerance is like, I can't even stand to see you or be around you as long as you're different from me, right? That's clearly recipe for disaster. But Swamiji says that tolerance is saying, I am allowing you to live. And he says, isn't that blasphemy? Right? He uses the word blasphemy. It's not for us to say who's allowed to live. Right? So acceptance in the sense that, yes, we are going to inhabit a world of people who have different values, different beliefs, different understandings. That level, I think, absolutely, we have to be accepting. Then we move more to the conceptual level, where I think the challenge that what Swamiji and Sri Ramakrishna are giving us is to say, your worldview and your practice that is working so beautifully and that you are convinced is true. This other thing that's very different from that is doing the same thing for someone else. And that's hard for us to grasp until we say, well, the reality is infinite. So it has vast space within it for very diverse and maybe on the surface level, radically incompatible understandings. So, and I think I'm really glad you've asked this question, because sometimes people will criticize the view of the Ramakrishna tradition and say, well, it's saying all religions are the same, but they're not really the same. It's like, no, it's not saying they're the same. They're not the same. But they're oriented toward the same reality, because there is no other reality. There just is reality, right? Reality is one. And so the challenge for us on the intellectual level is to see if there's anything we can learn from or appreciate in those other perspectives while still holding to our own. And this is Pravajika Rajaprana says this beautifully in her thin little book, Vedanta, A Simple Introduction, which I highly recommend to everyone. And I assign it to my students as well. She compares the world's spiritual traditions to pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle are not the same. In fact, that's the whole point. Each piece is different from every other piece. But with time and patience, and if you don't have a cat that will come and lay in the middle of it, you can put those pieces together and a larger picture is going to emerge. So I think what we're called to is, bare minimum, live peacefully with others. And then beyond that, engage in dialogue, mutually respectful dialogue, right? If someone doesn't respect you, they say, well, Vedanta, well, you're going to hell. It's like, okay, I don't have anything more to say to you till, some other circumstance arises. But if there could be mutually respectful dialogue and learning, then maybe we might very slowly start putting some of these pieces together and advancing toward a deeper understanding of existence. And I find that our teachers in the Vedanta tradition and in the tradition of Ramakrishna, if you read the complete works of Swamiji, for example, I mean, he's quoting from people from all over the world, different, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus. If you read Aldous Huxley's The Perennial Philosophy, right, he was a student of Vedanta. He's citing things from all over the world. So you can often find those bits and pieces that you do agree with in the other traditions. And I think those are also important to emphasize. The tendency in the field of the study of religion right now is to study difference. Because for many years, I think there was maybe an excessive focus the other way. Oh, look, we all have the same core values. To a great extent, that's true, but we also want to honor the distinctive aspects of each tradition. But I don't think it's expected that we're going to agree with everybody. I'm not Einstein, right? I mean, in many ways, I'm not Einstein. I'm nowhere near as smart as Einstein. But I do believe there is a transcendental reality. I believe that Sri Ramakrishna experienced it and gave us wisdom about it. I'm in this tradition. This is my satsang, right? And I don't expect to agree with people in other traditions or they're going their own way toward this same infinite. So I think that's an important thing, that it's not about kind of, if you think of each tradition as like a person, I don't think Vedanta is the kind of person who is so averse to conflict that they're just going to agree with everything they hear, right? I mean, I think that our position gets accused of that because we're saying, there's this deeper harmony. Saying, no, it's a deeper harmony. There may be all kinds of disharmony on the surface. And there may be things that people say and do that make us deeply uncomfortable. And say, no, I really would not want to be part of that. But I respect that that is a path for them. That is another path to an infinite. That's why it's a mystery. If we knew why they were there and why they were doing that, it wouldn't be a mystery. Because I said, okay, I respect that they're part of the mystery, and the world is richer and better because they're there. I guess the last thing I would add is we also just never know what the future is going to hold. And it could be that there may be some tradition or some belief system that we really don't agree with that ends up at some point in future history having the key to some very important issue or mystery in life. And it's like, well, I'm glad that was there, even though I didn't really agree with it for most of history. But they were right about this one thing. So, that might come about. I'm reminded of that science fiction movie, The Arrival, where the extraterrestrials who don't experience linear time come to Earth to give knowledge to humanity, and they're asked why they're doing it, and they say, well, in about 1,000 years you're going to help us, so, and to help us you need this thing, so here, so like we never know how mysterious how mysteriously history is going to play out. Another book which is a favorite of both Kusamita and myself, The Lord of the Rings. There's this great line where Gandalf tells Frodo that it's good that the character, the sort of bad guy Gollum, it's good that he was not killed at some earlier point, he says, because he may yet have a role to play, and even the very wise cannot see all things, right? And I won't spoil the story by telling you, but yeah, it's very important that character lives. So people are nodding, so they know. They've either seen the movie or read the book or both. I think, this is like the pressing issue of our time, what you've asked about. How to coexist with people and ways of thinking that are radically different from our own. And in not just different, but sometimes flatly contradictory. And we have to, physically coexist. That's the bare minimum, I think. But then, if whatever thing we can learn from the other and draw from the other. One of my favorite edicts of the Emperor Ashoka in ancient India, he enjoins his people to learn the doctrines of all other paths because they all teach something good. And the society will benefit if we draw from those things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you for those great questions, and for listening and being here, being my satsang today. So thank you.
Jeffrey, in this season of Thanksgiving, I have to say how enduringly grateful we are for you. This talk today was just another example of how much we love having you here. So thank you, and do come again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Shall we close with a brief invocation?
Yes, that would be
okay. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrityor Ma Mritangamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Thank you all.